Well, that direct happened. Okay, well, let's talk about it. I do cover Xenoblade occasionally on this channel, so let's talk about the news, or more specifically, the lack of news of Xenosaga, Xenogears, and Xenoblade X at the last Nintendo Partner Showcase. Direct. It's honestly a mouthful, really, when you think about it. Now, I'm still sick, so if I sound a little bit off, that's why. But let's get right on into it. First of all, obviously there wasn't going to be any Xenoblade X. It's the Nintendo Partner Direct. If Monolith was working on something and they had something ready to announce, that would just be a regular announcement or in a regular standard Direct. It wouldn't be in a Partner Direct. The real main hope, and that's all it really was hope, for the Partner Direct, that we would get something in regards to Xenosaga or Xenogears, as they've been rumored, or just at least heavily wished by the community, to have something in the works for those. You know? I believe a while ago, it may have been at the start of 2023, but don't quote me on that, it was reported, or something along those lines, that Bandai Namco and Nintendo were going to, partner up for some project. That could be any number of things, but Xenosaga, at least, is a possibility there. But let's talk about it. Am I disappointed? Obviously, I want to play Xenogears and Xenosaga as someone who holds Xenoblade very near and dear to my heart. I want to play those games, but I just don't have access to those games because there's no modern ports for them. And they're not on PC, at least legally. And while the story isn't exactly connected, though that's becoming a little bit vague in terms of Saga at least, there's a lot of similar themes and motifs and methodologies to convey a narrative and a story. If you want to really get down to the rabbit hole and research a topic, go look up Perfect Works. Trust me, that'll keep you occupied for a while. But honestly, I'm not going to take the lack of news at this partner showcase for either Saga or Gears as them essentially saying that we're not going to do Saga or Gears in some capacity, mainly because I wasn't expecting much out of this partner showcase to begin with, because everyone now is expecting the Switch 2 announcement to take place in March, according to a rumor. Hold on, I just put my beard in a zipper. Hold on, I gotta fix this. Oh my god. Okay. Now that the crisis has been averted, I've kind of been an advocate for the idea that if we're going to see Xenoblade X again, it would be on the next console, not on the Switch. Because that is a game that would work incredibly well for a game that you want to showcase what the new console and hardware can do, because according to my knowledge, that game scales with power very well. So to me, for Xenoblade X, it never made sense to try and almost hold it back and release it on a console nearing the end of its generation, whereas you could just push it off and have it be a launched release title, or something within that first year window, which was very beneficial for Xenoblade with the Switch. Remember when Xenoblade 2 came out in a time when there just wasn't a lot to play on the Switch, and look at how successful Xenoblade 2 became. It was easily, and still is, the highest selling Xenoblade game, and you could probably even extrapolate that to Xeno as an entire series as well, and it's not close either. Xenoblade 2 is incredible, it's my second favorite game of all time, but the stars aligned for that game. But they can align again for Xenoblade in the future, and I think for Xenoblade X, as I've said before, if you fix a few issues with that game, specifically the UI and the drop rates for certain objects, and you streamline those aspects, you get the ball rolling with the combat loop earlier in the game, maybe add a few more weapon types if you really want to, and you change the UI and you upscale the game, let it run at a higher frame rate with more graphical fidelity, and you drop that as a release title for the Switch 2, I'm sure that it would do well, because I believe in the quality that Xenoblade X is. I love that game to death. It's my second favorite Xenoblade game. Is it perfect? No, but its imperfections can easily be smoothed over. They're not like intrinsic flaws with the overarching system. They're just design changes here and there and certain tweaks that need to be made, like the drop rates and stuff like that. If the Switch 2 is better online, well, Xenoblade X is meant to have online playability. That works incredibly well. You know how hype it would be to have an entire, Xenoblade raid party where you go out and farm loot to buy, your new scale or whatever by going to take on these giant hunts in the overworld? It's a great idea and has a lot of potential for Xenoblade. Problem was, it released on the Wii U and 7 people and myself got it. And Nintendo Online is Nintendo Online, let's be fair here. When it concerns Xenogears and Xenosaga, this becomes a little bit more interesting because Xenogears is at least one-off game, but it's a game that has a notorious second disc that, to my knowledge, transitions away from being necessarily a game and more to a visual novel due to time constraints with the game. And while the story is really good, as a game, that doesn't really hold up, now does it? So I imagine they would want to take an even closer look, Square Enix in this regard, at Xenogears and do a lot more intrinsic heavy lifting duty in regards to that game. That would require a lot more work. And assuming that got greenlit within the last year or a couple of years, or even now, what makes the most sense? Coming out in the Switch, or holding off for the Switch too? And it's going to be a similar line of thinking to Xenosaga, just for a different shift in perspective here. That's 3 games, right? At least Xenoblade X or Xenogears are just one-off games. Xenosaga's a trilogy. And while I imagine a straight-up port would work more for Xenosaga than it would for Gears, I imagine it would be more advertisable if you did a few touch-ups here and there. And again, that pushes it off to the Switch too. So am I necessarily, like, cynical about the prospects of Xenosaga or Xenogears returning in some capacity? No, not really. As I've said before, anything can come about with that partnership between Bandai Namco and Nintendo for whatever they're working on. Square Enix likes to go back into their bag of IPs every now and then and just remake an old RPG. Xenogears fits that bill, or fits the bill, so that's always going to be a wild card when it comes to them. And then we have Xenoblade X with Nintendo and Monolith. At least there's no real IP issues there. We have to go negotiate with another company. That's an in-house thing. It's the only Xenoblade game not on the Switch. So the only question there is, does Nintendo think it's financially viable to do anything with Xenoblade X again? Or do they think it's just better to have the main team focus more on Xenoblade 4, which I imagine they're going to do anyways? Like, if it really comes down to a decision for them to say, what do we think will make the most money? Xenoblade X, X2, or Xenoblade 4? The answer's going to be 4, right? Like, it just is. But, as I've said before, Xenoblade likes to release 2 things in between each numbered game. Between 1 and 2, we had 1 on the 3DS, and we had Xenoblade X. Between 2 and 3, we had Torn of the Golden Country, and we had Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition for the Switch. We've already had Future Redeemed after Xenoblade 3, so if that pattern holds, then there's still 1 thing left before Xenoblade 4. My prediction is that Xenoblade X Definitive Edition for the Switch too. That's my prediction. I've held firm to that prediction, and I'm going to remain firm to that prediction, because it makes the most sense to me. I think Xenoblade X is incredibly advertisable. The world is gorgeous, the characters are really cool and interesting, the soundtrack is amazing, and like maybe, depending upon the litigation of it all, maybe the issue with bringing Xenoblade X back is the soundtrack because it's Sawano. And maybe there's some like legal thing going up there, or maybe Nintendo just owns the entire soundtrack outright, and that was already handled, and I'm just overthinking this, like that's entirely possible. But who knows, right? Like maybe licensing issues, but assuming that's not the case, doing something with Xenoblade X for the launch window of the Switch 2 just makes the most sense to me. I know Square Enix came out and said relatively recently that they want to focus more in on those larger projects, but Xenogears can easily be a larger project, right? Especially if you're going to completely revamp Disc 2. You could just completely remake Xenogears, make it an entirely different game, just with the same story, and that may be the route they eventually decide to go down. And the more I think about it, the more I think if we're going to see Xenogears again, I think that's the most likely candidate, is a full-blown remake instead of a remaster or just a port. I think a remake's the most likely candidate here, to try and address those overarching issues that Xenogears has, that won't go away easily. Maybe they do something like they did for Star Ocean, but I think it may need a little bit more than that, or they can do something in that style. It's one of those wait and sees, obviously. Saga's the most flimsy of the 3 in my opinion, but it's still like supported by the fact that Future Redeemed directly credited Xenosaga and Bandai Namco, and directly referenced the story of Saga, and essentially canonized it to Xenoblade. Lost Jerusalem is essentially just Earth and the events of Xenoblade, and at the post-credits scene of Future Redeemed, we essentially just see Cosmos from the end of Xenosaga 3 coming back to Earth. So the reason I've always kind of held firm to the idea, ever since I beat Future Redeemed and learned about all this, that we'll see Xenosaga again is just because why would you do that otherwise? Like, if you are Nintendo, why would you go out and try and do all this with Bandai Namco if you don't have something in the work for this? Businesses care about money. They don't care about anything else, and this is important to bear in mind. And maybe this was just something that Takahashi asked for, and Nintendo granted the wish, and managed to go and negotiate with Bandai Namco. Maybe that's the case. But business-wise, that makes the most sense if you're going to reintroduce 3 games worth of canon into this new canon that a lot of people were perfectly content with the idea that it was a completely separate thing. Most people were. But you go out of your way to canonize these 3 games of old that most people don't have access to anymore. Why would you do that if you don't plan to utilize that in the future? And maybe that's just the case with Xenoblade 4, but you have this entire, pool of new players that have never played Xenosaga, and all of a sudden you want to introduce all this, 3 games of lore to them for the future. Do you want to do that with them having no way or access to these older games? That doesn't make sense to me. The only answer there is to give them a way to play these older games, whether that comes in the form of ports, remasters, or remakes. That's the thing that makes sense to me. If you view this strictly from a business perspective and what Nintendo is trying to plan for in the future and for the future of this series, things fall into place if these are the series of events. It's possible I'm wrong here. Bear that in mind. But to me, it makes more sense if this is the way to think, if this is the long-term strategy. And if that's the case, we have a long way to go before Saga could come back. Let me rephrase that. We have more of a cushion of a time window, because assuming Xenoblade 4 utilizes Saga in some capacity for the story, and assuming that Nintendo and Monolith want you to at least have access to Saga to have this knowledge, or this background, that leaves it up until the release of Xenoblade 4, which I can't imagine won't be for a few years. So, for all those reasons, that's why I'm not particularly pessimistic or, off-put by the lack of Saga or Gears from the partner showcase. It was always a snowball's chance in hell that we would get anything from that direct. It didn't come to pass. Everything is more likely for the Switch 2, in my opinion. Or for multi-platform ports, maybe. Mainly for Gears and Saga with that one. So yeah, Switch 2 announcement should be within a month, maybe, hopefully. Cross your fingers unless Nintendo wants to Nintendo again. Who knows? Hell, the rumors are now that they punted the release of the Switch 2 off to 2025, or at least early 2025. So who knows about the announcement, yeah? We're just all guessing at this point. Eventually we'll be right? Right? Eventually. But with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions, and your predictions. I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and hear your perspectives. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be notified when I upload and stream in the future. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.